Hi, hello. It's Rachel. I'm doing another DC related video. So, as I said in my review of the Batman, I am a big DC fan. Since I'm so invested in DC, I thought it would be fun to make a tier list of the DCEU films. Which, okay, technically, I know that the Batman isn't a DCEU film, as I found out like literally a couple days before seeing it. For people who aren't aware, the Batman is its own universe. There's potentially going to be a trilogy. There's probably going to be a trilogy because I'm sure it's doing well. I haven't looked at numbers or anything, but just given all the hype I've seen around it, I'm sure it's doing great at the box office. And I knew it was doing well with critics before I even had the chance to see it, so I'm sure that hasn't changed either. So we're probably getting a trilogy. I know there's potential TV shows for HBO Max that could be happening. So I'm sure we'll see a lot more in this specific Batman universe, but this is not tied to any other films in the DCEU. I am including it in the DCEU tier list, even though because the Flash film that's coming out, I know it's at some point in 2022, or at least as of right now, it's supposed to come out this year. Since that film is bringing Keaton Batman into the DCEU, we're already doing multiverse, so why not? Why not include the Batman? So, you hear me say I'm including the Batman. I am not including the Joker film that came out a few years ago. And if you're wondering why, it's because I just think the depiction of mental illness is extremely troubling. There was a really good video essay I saw probably close to a year and a half ago now. I'll include a link to that because the individual who made that video essay can explain far better than I can. Okay, so like my Batman review, I don't have a script per se, but I do have like 3 pages worth of notes of things that I don't want to forget to mention. So it's a little bit more structured than my last video was. First off, I guess I should say I did not make this, so this doesn't include the Batman because, as I said, it's technically not a DCEU film. And since I didn't make it, I'm pretty sure I couldn't add it to the template. But since this already exists, it didn't feel worthwhile for me to make my own. This basically follows the structure of these normal tier lists, but I have perfection, a fun time, meh, awful, and burn it. Okay, when I say perfection, I don't literally mean perfection. Like, as much as I love some of the stuff I'm gonna put in perfection, like, I still have minor gripes with them. Like, I don't think there's a single movie I've watched where I've been like, yes, there's absolutely objectively nothing wrong with this. Like, that just doesn't happen. Okay, so next is a fun time. When I say a fun time, I mean something that I enjoy a lot and probably rewatch on occasion, which now that I say that, if I say perfection, it's something I rewatch a lot. If it's lower than a fun time, I don't rewatch. Like once was enough. Once was enough. So fun time means that I enjoyed it. I think there are a lot of pretty strong positives, but the issues are definitely bigger than perfection. And if I say a fun time, I don't even mean like it's objectively good because I can watch something and acknowledge that it's a bad film and still have a decent time watching it. Meh is like I think the movie's all right. It's decent, but I feel like it's overhyped and people overstate how good it is. And whatever goes in this category, I just personally it's not for me. Awful, I think is pretty self-explanatory. If I'm putting it in awful, that means I think that there's very little good, but like I can still see why some people might find enjoyment, I guess. I mean, the main difference between awful and burn it is like literally I don't see any positives and like I wish it didn't exist. Awful is like, I don't think it's worth your time. So, disclaimer, since I'm probably going to be hashtag controversial with my DC opinions, you can disagree with me. Like I'm not gonna be mad at someone disagreeing with me. I'm not gonna be mad at someone saying they don't like the things I do like. So hopefully you won't get mad at me for saying I don't like things that you like. For example, I watch a lot of shows on the CW, and I know a ton of people think everything on the CW is trash. And I mean, I will happily admit that the majority of stuff on the CW network is badly written. For the most part, I'm still enjoying myself, even if I can acknowledge that the writing is not good. So, if I say something is bad writing, I'm not saying anything bad about you personally for enjoying it. I'm just saying that I think it's bad writing, and I think it could have been better. Different tastes are fine. You don't have to agree with me about thinking Snyder's version of Superman is good. You can hate it. You can have whatever opinion you want. It's fine. It's just some films. Like it's not gonna hurt my feelings if you disagree with me. So now that I've said that disclaimer though, since I did mention Snyder, as much as you may not like his interpretations of these characters, I feel like people refuse to give him the credit he deserves because again, you can hate his interpretations as much as you want. But if you like any of the films we've gotten from the DCEU, literally none of them would exist without Snyder because none of this exists without Man of Steel. And like I will go as far as to say the Batman 2022 probably would not exist without Batman v Superman. So if you enjoyed the Batman, you gotta give Zack his flowers. Like you have to acknowledge that he built this universe. But anyway, I guess now that I've said all that, it's time to actually go through the tier list. So, Man of Steel. So, I'm gonna drag this to a fun time. I think Man of Steel is a really good origin story, and I think my favorite aspect of the film is the structure because I love how we like start with Clark as an adult, just like doing these odd jobs so he can aid people in secret, and we get these flashbacks to like learn about who he is. Like I just thought that was a really cool structure because I feel like most films try to do like the chronological thing where it's like here are the important events of this character's life as a kid, and I mean there's nothing wrong with that structure, but like it can get kind of repetitive, so I thought it was like I remember just being really struck by that when I saw this in theaters. I love when Zod's introduced, he does that thing where he gets on everyone's electronics. And he's like broadcasting that you are not alone message. Oh my gosh. The horror vibes of that scene, so good. So scary. I get chills every time I watch, even though I've seen it at least 10 times. It's so good. I love, 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 love the look of Krypton. And I just think it's so beautiful. I love the like liquid metal look of the tech. That was so cool. Also, okay, not to rant, but I feel like literally every DC property that's shown Krypton since Man of Steel has come out has literally just plagiarized Zack's look for Krypton, and it makes me so mad because literally everyone was shitting on Man of Steel when it came out. Like literally, I remember coming home wanting to talk about it, and all I could find were people talking about how much they hated it, how much they hated everything about Clark, and like how things ended with Zod. Because I swear I could not find like anything positive. So I just kind of like gave up and didn't really talk about the fact that I liked this. But literally, because like Supergirl used the same visuals. Krypton on FX, I believe. I never watched it, but I've seen the visuals. It looks the same. It's not even just that. Like I've seen so much DC stuff that literally the visuals look like they could have been cut straight out of Man of Steel or Batman v Superman. And it's like people will lose their shit about about how cool they think that scene looks, and then they'll do nothing but like talk shit about both those films, and it just makes me rabid. But we will get back to what I was saying about Man of Steel, because if I start that tangent, it will never end. Okay, yeah, so I think, like I was saying, I think this is a really good origin film, but I feel like people don't really fully realize how good of an origin film it is until you see Batman v Superman is, because I mean, I liked this. As I said, I was trying to find people to talk about it with because I liked it. But I didn't think about it all that much. Like, I don't even know if I ever sat down and rewatched it all the way through before I saw Batman v Superman. And I was excited for Batman v Superman. Like, I saw that opening night, 10 p.m. that Thursday, so I was at the theater until almost 1 a.m. And when I saw Batman v Superman, I was like astounded by like how fantastic Man of Steel was as like setup for that. Because for people who aren't aware, the plan was always, I don't know if like from the start they were planning to bring in the other DC characters. Like I don't, because Man of Steel was 2013. I believe Batman v Superman was a potential plan starting in 2014. But from day one, Man of Steel was meant to be the first of at least a trilogy. Because when Batman v Superman became the sequel, the plan was supposed to be a five arc film. So while I do think Man of Steel is a good origin story, it works pretty well as a standalone film because that's how I viewed it before Batman v Superman came out. It was never meant to be like on its own. It was always meant to be a larger story told over multiple films. So it's like you can't fully conceptualize how good it is until you start getting more of those pieces. But yeah, the main reason why I say a fun time instead of perfection is because I don't know, Man of Steel didn't like blow my mind. Like again, I really liked it. I watch it now probably once a year. Because like I said, I don't think I watched it for like those 3 years all the way through. But yeah, that was my long-winded way of saying Batman v Superman makes it better. I mean, it was already great, but it makes it so much better. I love Lois's role. Oh my gosh, she's so integral to this film. Like, I love that we follow her after she meets Clark that first time before she like fully figures out who he is, because it's important to fully understand Lois. And literally the second we're introduced to her, we have a character who's talking about how he doesn't like the Daily Planet, but he reads her articles because she's Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Lois Lane. Like people listen to her because of her reputation. She is so capable. Like she cares about the truth and justice so much. Like she just keeps digging. Like she meets Clark and she could just leave it alone and be like, that was weird that I got saved by this dude with laser eyes. But no, she wants him to know that she knows what happened. She knows it was real. And then she just digs and digs and digs until she finds Clark. And like the scene when she finds Clark, I was so shocked because like okay, this is probably gonna make people mad, but time to admit the fact that besides WB Network's Smallville and Snyder Superman and what was it? Was it Superman Returns, the film with Brandon Routh? Besides those three interpretations of Superman, I am not that familiar with the character. Like I'm not a comics girl because there's just too much going on with all the reboots and like probably hundreds of people writing for characters. Like it just seems so chaotic and overwhelming. So I will probably never dip my toe into that area. I didn't see the animated stuff because as I didn't get into DC really until the first few years of the 2010s. I mean, I was like in my late teens at that point, So I didn't really watch any kind of animated television really. So yeah, so I'm not that familiar with the animated stuff. And I just haven't gotten around to watching like the Christopher Reeves films that most Superman fans seem to enjoy because I don't know, it doesn't seem like I tend to like more serious takes when it comes to superhero media. So it just doesn't seem like the kind of interpretation that would be all that interesting to me. Before that tangent about how I'm not super familiar with other versions of Clark, I was saying about how important Lois was and that we need to fully see her as Lois before we can have Lois and Clark's dynamic. And I absolutely adore Clois in this film. Like, they are, in my opinion, the best thing about the film. And there's a lot of really good stuff about the film. But yeah, I love how understanding they are. Like, the fact that Clark is so ready to trust her. I mean, she already found out. He knew she found out. But he then tells her about what happened to his father. Like, he's willing to trust her with that information, which is a lot. And then the way she returns that trust by keeping his secret when she easily could have told because she's being held for not revealing his identity. I love the reciprocity of that trust. I love how tender they are. Like, it's very sweet. And honestly, I think it's one of the best action film romances we've seen in a while. So I guess now it's time for spoilers. I'll include a timestamp and to talk about the controversy of the film and the reason as to why it got so much hate. So, as you know, if you've watched, Clark kills Zod at the end of the film. And I understand wanting a more clean and definitive line that Clark is refusing to cross. I definitely understand the appeal of that. I get that it's a more digestible story to have your heroes be like, no, this killing is over the line, I won't do it. But Clark is in the situation of he's fighting military trained Kryptonian warriors. And I mean, Clark is already outmatched because it's multiple people who are literal trained warriors versus him. He has no training. They all have the same abilities because they're all Kryptonians. Like, he didn't even perform as Superman until like they outed the fact that he was on the planet. So yeah, he has no training because who's he gonna get training from? He can't get training from anyone with powers because as far as he knows, he's the only Kryptonian on Earth. He's helping humans. Like, it's not like he's gonna need it because he can always overpower humans if that's what a situation calls for. Which, given what we'd seen prior to his revealing himself as Superman, like, he wasn't fighting people. He was literally just like saving people from freak incidents that would be lethal. So I mean, I don't know how much he's had to actually physically fight people in the first place. Like I was saying, how do you expect the situation's gonna go if you have literally half a dozen trained Kryptonian warriors versus someone with no training? And they all have the same exact abilities because they're all Kryptonians. Like, of course, it's gonna be a disaster for Clark. Like, there's no universe where it's not. And again, you can say, I didn't want this, like, I wanted Clark to have some easy wins. But if you want something grounded in reality, like this is, what else is going to bring him out? Because Clark was terrified. He's like, I'm not going to be accepted. And so I should just not use my abilities. Like, yeah, of course, this is going to be brutal because he doesn't have any other skills. Also, the frustration that I even have to say this, but I feel like people don't register that this is the events. Okay, so like I said, I haven't properly watched Reeves Superman films, but I've seen the ending of Superman 2. I've seen that scene where Clark depowers Zod and throws him down the shaft. Like, he's dead. He's dead. There's no way he survived that. So if you're jumping down Zack's throat for Clark killing Zod, he did that in Superman 2. Like, you can't attack Zack for that and then be like, "Oh yeah, Superman 2, that's the best Superman ever." Like, same end result. Same end result, baby. And also, like, the way that's just like brutal because like if Zod is depowered, he literally didn't need to do that. Like, he literally crushed Zod's hand and threw him down the shaft. He's depowered. He can't harm you, Clark. Like, you don't have to murder him. He's depowered. And he does that anyway, and he's like smirking about it. Meanwhile, in Man of Steel, Clark is in the position of Zod saying, "You kill me or I kill you. That's the only way this ends." And Clark begs him to stop, and Zod refuses, and so Clark kills him because Zod's made it clear that's the only option. So I find Man of Steel's version significantly more poignant and honestly less cruel. But anyway, we will move on. I'm sure people are already mad at me for that opinion. So yeah, here we go, where I'm really gonna ruffle some feathers probably. So next is Batman v Superman. I'm talking about the Ultimate Edition, but I'm going to label this as perfection. I still think the theatrical cut is pretty good. Like, I saw it in theaters 4 times. I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of scared to admit this, just because of how much vitriol is thrown at this film. But Batman v Superman is literally my favorite film ever made. I love the way that this film manages to balance three separate plots. Like, I don't know how to describe it other than being like so incredibly intricate and detailed. Like, plot one is Clark, and he's having a crisis of faith. He's been doing this for 2 years. Lots of people are mad at him from the events of Man of Steel, which is unfortunate, but it's understandable because, like, thousands of people did die. So people are mad at Clark. He feels like maybe he's not helping as much as he was hoping for. And then we have the second plot, which is Bruce, who witnessed the events of that battle between Clark and Zod, and he's enraged about all the destruction. He's terrified about what this means, about what Clark can do, and he's just literally drowning in his paranoia of potential situations where Clark goes on more or less a rampage and decides to hurt humans. It's just a very sad story of like his descent into his anxieties because he literally can't see past his terror, and it's twisting him into something bitter. And then we have Lex, who's just, oh my god, the mastermind. He's manipulating everyone, he knows everything, he's incredible. This version of Lex is probably top 5 movie villains of all time. Like, I just love him. He is so freaking smart. Like, he literally knows everything. Like, he's looking for the kryptonite because he knows that's what's gonna make Superman weak. And he's just furious at Clark because he feels like he's been wronged since Clark didn't save him as a child from his dad. Which, I mean, that's kind of a spoiler for Lex's speech near the end of the film. But, I mean, in terms of narrative, like, eh, sorry if I spoiled that for you if you haven't seen it. It's also 6 years old though, so if you somehow didn't manage to know that, that's impressive. Also, I am very shocked and flattered that you're here if you somehow didn't know that. But anyway, Lex's whole plan, his whole drive is that he wants people to be as angry and, I guess, vengeful towards Clark as he is. Lois was so good in Man of Steel, but if you thought she was amazing in that, she's so much more incredible in this. She's integral to literally everything. Okay, so kind of spoilers. So again, because I think pretty much everything I say past this point is going to be spoilers, so I'll put it in a timestamp if you don't want spoilers. But like I was saying, Lois is integral to everything. If she hadn't gone to that country in Africa, the name's escaping me, sorry, then she obviously the attack wouldn't have happened because Lex was trying to set up Clark. But if she hadn't have been there, then she wouldn't have gotten that bullet. That was one of his prototypes, right? I think that's the word I want. And because she finds that bullet that was made at LexCorp, then she's able to find all this information, putting Lex at the center of all this stuff. And if she hadn't figured all this out, then she never would have been able to help Clark reach Bruce. And who knows how much more awful the whole Doomsday battle would have been if they hadn't been able to reach Bruce. Because I mean, Bruce would have killed Clark if she hadn't been able to do that. She gives Clark the strength to sacrifice himself, and she's literally the reason Lex gets arrested. Like, she is behind everything in this film. I love her. And it's just so frustrating because outside of the people who vocally love Batman v Superman, I feel like anytime I hear people discuss Lois in this film and Man of Steel, they're always just complaining about how she's a damsel in distress. And it genuinely breaks my heart because, I mean, no, she's not physically fighting people. And yes, Clark does have to save her, like that scene where she got thrown off the tower or that scene where she almost drowned. But look at everything she did with her mind. Like her passion, her mind, and her stubbornness. And she accomplished all of this. And like it's not even that she's a damsel because she's not like waiting for Clark to save her. Like Lois is ready to die. Like she fully expected to die when Lex threw her off that building. She wasn't expecting Clark to come get her when she jumped in that, I don't want to say lake, whatever you call that area of water that she was in, when she was trying to get the spear. Like she wasn't doing these things in the hope that someone would come save her. She was doing them because it was the right thing to do. I think I said everything I wanted to say about Lois. So I think it's time to talk about the scene in this film that gets relentlessly shit on, which is the Martha scene. And so I I understand that some people don't like the execution of it, but there are so many people who make fun of the scene, and I feel like if you understand what the scene is doing, I don't think it's possible for you to find humor in it. Because okay, so the first scene of the film is the intercut scenes of Bruce running away from his parents' funeral and their murder outside of the theater. The last thing his father said was Martha. So, of course, when he's standing over Clark, when Clark is laying on the ground and Bruce is in the position to give him a fatal strike and kill him, and Clark says the name Martha, of course that's gonna give Bruce flashbacks. Like if you don't know, Bruce has PTSD from watching his parents be murdered in front of him. Literally, how is someone being literally in the exact same position as his dad saying the same thing his dad said that was his dad's dying word? How is that not gonna trigger a flashback? Like, Bruce is literally in the middle of a panic attack when he's screaming at Clark to tell him why he said that name. Like I said, Bruce has been terrified and he can't see past his fear. Like, he literally has spent the past 2 years unable to conceptualize Clark as anything but an alien threat. And then he hears the name Martha, and now he knows that Clark has human beings that he cares for and that there are human beings that care for him in return. So now he can't see Clark solely as an alien threat if there are people on this planet who are human that care about Clark. And so he now realizes that he was in the position that his parents' murderer was in, and he was about to rob these people who care about Clark of him like he was robbed of his parents. And it's not because a lot of people like to be like, oh, they're besties now because their moms share the same name, and that's not the situation at all. And I know that's people just wanting to like be like, haha, here's some fun jokes, but it's so frustrating because, like I was just saying, Bruce is literally like having a PTSD flashback, and he's now fully realizing Clark as someone capable of humanity because he wasn't able to see that before because of all his paranoia. And so he's literally just trying to one fix the fact that he misread the situation so badly because he was literally like 30 seconds away from murdering Clark. So he's like, I owe you saving your mom because of what I almost just did. But two, he's literally trying to, in a way, turn back the clock on what happened to him. Because if he can save Clark's mom, it's as if he is saving his own parents that night. So it's just very frustrating how people don't seem to understand what's going on in there. Which kind of brings me to my thought of like, I was kind of saying this with Man of Steel. Because, okay, so I feel like a lot of people come at these films with bad faith criticisms. Because, I mean, there are valid critiques, and I didn't even really get into them because I'm trying to keep this uh, from being like 10 hours. Yeah, so there are people who just like, I feel like a lot of the criticisms are bad faith criticisms because it's people who are like, I don't want this interpretation of Clark. I want something that's like black and white morality. I want something that's like a popcorn flick and I don't have to think that hard about, which like it's fair to want those things. Like I enjoy the occasional popcorn flick too, but I mean if this were in the real world, like it's trying to portray that version of events, are you trying to tell me that people would not be terrified of Clark? Like especially after the events of Man of Steel, but even if you ignore that and somehow he just started using his powers one day. Like, are you telling me there would not be like normal people who don't even engage in anything criminal? Like, you're telling me they wouldn't be terrified of Clark just knowing what he could do, or like being suspicious of him, knowing what he can do? Like, yeah, of course there are gonna be people like that. Also, Superman's literally an immigrant story. Like, given the way people treat immigrants, well, immigrants of color, because most white immigrants don't get anywhere near the same treatment as immigrants of color. There's definitely going to be people who, solely because he's not from Earth, who would treat him terribly. Like, because, like, we even see briefly during the Capitol scene, there are those protesters who are anti Superman and have, like, those posters. It's been like a year, so I can't recall any of the like slogans. But I remember that scene where we see the protesters. So like it's not unrealistic for people to be hating a Superman figure because that 100% would happen in real life if this situation was real. And I feel like because we're not getting the simple clean cut stories, people just refuse to engage with the text as it is, which again, you don't have to like it. You can say it's not your taste, but I feel like people refuse to find the line between liking, disliking something and whether it's like a good or bad film. And it's just frustrating because this is definitely, like I said, I think it's really, really intricate the way the plot is set up, and I think it's pretty masterful how everything comes together. And somehow people we'll see all of the work that's gone into the writing and everything else. But I mean, the writing is really what makes this film as good as it is. And they just write it off because they didn't want to see this version of Superman or this version of Batman. And it's really depressing, to be honest. But anyway, I've rambled enough about that. So let's move on. So the next film is Suicide Squad. I'm going to label this as a fun time. I think that objectively the plot is nonsense. Like it, the film turns out to be a rescue mission, but I, from what I recall, because it's been a while since I watched it, I've seen this like I think 3 or 4 times, but the most recent time was like a year ago. But yeah, like it's like a rescue mission, but like we literally don't know that that's what the plot is until we're like literally in the middle of the rescue mission. So there's just something messy about the narrative. I mean, I think it's a relatively fun time though. Like
I think Amanda, Floyd, Harley, and Shadow were all excellent and had really good characterization. I mean, Amanda was underutilized, which, as someone who loves Viola Davis and thinks she's amazing in every role she does, kind of sucks. But, like, it's immediately clear that she's not someone to mess with because she literally has the whole team under her thumb. And, like, if they do anything she doesn't like, they're dead. And they know that. I love that Floyd's driving force for the whole film is his relationship with his daughter, and that like thinking about her during the final fight is like what gives him the strength for that final blow that he gives Enchantress. I love Shadow's arc, where he, I don't want to say healing, but where he's like coming to terms with his guilt over the incident where he lost control of his powers, and that he finds a family with a team. Like, that was so sweet. But with all those positives, there are also negatives.
the Joker was by far the worst part of the film. Like I get why he's there for the flashbacks for Harley because it's somewhat important to like get her backstory to understand her. And Joker's a big part of her backstory because without him, she wouldn't be in Arkham. But like, I don't know. I think all of his present day scenes like detract from everything else going on. They're just really unnecessary. Jared Leto's a creep. I mean, he's an alleged rapist for people who somehow don't know that. So like, yeah, he's a creep. I hate that he's in this film at all. Cause like, okay, even if he's not a rapist, which I fully believe, he was still doing all that really weird, nasty shit on set and like harassing his castmates. So like, why is he still getting jobs? why why is he allowed to still work? When is his career gonna die? I'm sick of this man. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about Joker. Um, maybe it would have been less awful to witness with a different actor, but I still don't think I would understand his points for like the present day stuff. Also, I just want to say the Rick June romance was like really bland. I don't want to say it was like bad because like I think I understand its purpose narratively because like since Enchantress is inhabiting June's body, like we needed the stakes of like Rick cares about her, so like we can't kill her, I guess. So I mean, I don't hate it for like that narrative purpose, but like we're literally just kind of thrown into them in a relationship with no build up, and then I'm supposed to care when we pretty much never see them interact because June's taken over by Enchantress for like 80% of the film probably. So yeah, I didn't care. It bored me. But yeah, like I was saying when I was mentioning the tears, if I'm putting it in a fun time, then I think the positives outweigh the negatives. So yeah, it's really just that like I think Amanda, Floyd, Harley, and Shadow, I think all of the writing for them outweighs the rest of the stuff because I think pretty much the writing for those four is the only good thing. And I do really enjoy Floyd and Harley's dynamic. Like that was definitely what stood out to me when I uh, originally watched the film. And every time I rewatch it, it's still my favorite part. But yeah, okay. So next film is Wonder Woman. Um, so I'm gonna label this as awful. Honestly, I still don't understand the plot. I saw this 4 years ago. I really don't want to rewatch it. It was not good. So if you're about to say you should rewatch it if you didn't understand the plot, I'm not going to. Sorry. I don't know how many people are aware of this, because if you're not like super online, I guess you could have missed it. But shortly after Wonder Woman came out, I remember there was a script that Joss Whedon had written that like leaked for Wonder Woman. And I remember seeing so many people relieved that this version of Wonder Woman wasn't canon. And I'm also glad because Joss Whedon is a terrible person. Honestly, you don't have to look further than all the racism and misogyny in his work, but just given everything that's been said about the Justice League set and like how he did a bunch of rewrites to like cut out Victor, he's awful. So I'm glad that his version didn't become an actual film as well. But I I hadn't seen the film when I remember seeing everyone upset about that script, and then I saw it and I was like, did Diana as a character really change all that much? Like, yes, the narrative surrounding Diana changed because Whedon's version was like Diana's like too powerful and like she has to be tamed by a guy. And Patty Jenkins' version, like Steve actually respects her. But like literally Diana as a character was the same. Like she was still like the sexy badass. And also it really bothered me how clueless Diana was because like she would talk about having extensive knowledge of humans and like I believe she said something about knowing like thousands of languages. Like she knows like so much about like events in humanity, and yet like every 5 minutes she was making this really some really embarrassing faux pas just for like jokes. And it's like if she has this much knowledge of humans, like even if she doesn't firsthand know things, like why when actually interacting with humans does she not know anything? Like it was weird, and it feels very Born Sexy Yesterday, which is there was a video that Pop Culture Detective did on it, which was really good. Which now that I think about it, I'll probably include a link to that because it really feels like that's what was going on with Diana, and I did not care for it. Another thing that kind of annoys me is I remember before I had the chance to see Wonder Woman myself, I remember seeing a ton of people like laud this scene where Diana talks to an indigenous character and the indigenous character just kind of like makes a comment about how white immigrants were terrible to indigenous peoples, which like if you know anything about the history of America, this is something you're aware of. And the fact that that scene got so much praise for existing when it literally didn't say anything of value, like it literally just acknowledged what has happened. It doesn't sit right with me that people were praising that film just for saying that without saying anything meaningful. It's literally just there for like brownie points, and people can point to it and be like, "Look how progressive this is," when like it's not. You're just acknowledging a fact. You're acknowledging a fact that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge, but it's still literally just acknowledging a fact. Which, okay, now that I've complained about that scene, can we talk for a second about like how white feminist Wonder Woman is as a film? And like, okay, before you start getting on my case about how I didn't talk about the racism in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, like, yes, I'm aware of it. I know the I guess Dia de los Muertos scene because it's all those individuals in Mexico with like skulls painted on their face. The optics of that, it's pretty white saviory, and it's kind of uncomfortable to sit through that scene. But like I also do understand that it's supposed to parallel the scene in Man of Steel when Clark is sinking into the skulls when Zod's in his head. So like I appreciate the parallel that Zach was trying to do, but the optics are bad, and he should have found a different way to have like Clark rising from the skulls because that's kind of what it's supposed to be. Because yeah, it's a very white saviory moment, and like I'm also aware that the only two important women of color in Batman v Superman both die, which is it's not great. It's not great. It's probably my biggest problem with the film. But like also neither Man of Steel nor Batman v Superman like promoted themselves as like this big capital F feminist film because from what I remember of the promotion for Wonder Woman, that's what was going on. And the film just fails to account for race like at all. Because like we have the indigenous character I was just talking about, and like I don't recall him doing much of anything outside of that scene. And then there's this guy who's like Steve's friend who's noticeably a man of color, like he's brown. And from what I recall, he was literally just there for comedic relief. Like I don't think he did much of anything except make jokes. And then I also remember that there was like so much talk about how there were women of color playing Amazonians, but except for like this one black woman who was basically like Diana's nanny for the opening sequence, I can barely recall seeing any of them because it was all like blink and you miss it besides that one black woman, which like that's also not good. I feel like pretty much none of the characters outside of Steve or Diana had a personality. I mean, again, it's been close to 5 years, so maybe I somehow was missing things, but from what I remember, I feel like there wasn't really much going on for any of the other characters. Like I was saying, I don't feel like Diana had that much going on for her because she was literally just sexy badass who's also somehow very clueless. And then Steve was just like good guy in a war who's nice to women. And yeah, I feel like there was not much else of substance there. But yeah, I feel like their romance was poorly developed because I remember seeing ads and I was like ready to be into their relationship. Like I was rooting for it from the ads, but then I watched and I wasn't really feeling anything. And then suddenly they were kissing and I was like, "Where what? Where did this come from? How did we get here?" And I was so confused because it felt like it was out of nowhere, honestly. Like I mean, I knew it was going to happen cuz promos, but it felt like there was nothing that had built to that. Spoilers, but if you haven't seen this, I kind of hope you don't skip ahead. But if you really don't want spoilers, I'll put a timestamp. Isabel, the main villain, who, by the way, is disfigured, so yay ableism. Isabel has been doing, from what I recall, like chemical tests on people, and so Diana literally has her cornered, and she's put in the situation of what do I do now that I have her? And Diana's decision is to let Isabel run away because, as the narrative puts it, Diana is choosing love. So the narrative is telling us that Diana is choosing love by letting a war criminal go free and potentially, well, probably, harming more people. How the hell is that choosing love? How is letting Isabel go with no consequences and no accountability? How is that choosing love? I get that our current system is also horrendous, so jail or some kind of captivity is probably not a great solution, but letting a literal war criminal go free to potentially harm more people is definitely not the right call. Choosing love would be Isabel faces consequences. I find it so insulting that that's her hard decision when Clark's hard decision was like literally killing the last of his people. And like the fact that so many people applaud Diana for letting her go, which again, Isabel's a war criminal. So like it shouldn't be applauded that she's letting her go. But so many people will like applaud Diana doing that and then they'll complain about Clark killing Zod. And it's like I said when I was talking about Man of Steel, like Clark literally had no choice. It was either they keep fighting endlessly and Clark watches more people die, or he kills Zod. And I mean, I guess Diana technically isn't in that position because Isabel's a human. But again, as I've said multiple times, she's a war criminal who could potentially keep harming people. And we're supposed to be happy that Diana lets her go. So, yeah, I really fucking hate Wonder Woman because of that. So, the next film is Justice League 2017. This falls into Burn It. This film is vile. Whedon's reshoots look hideous. There are so many scenes where it's like it looks natural and like the lighting's nice, and then you go to very obviously different backgrounds and a bunch of annoying quips. So many quips. Oh my gosh. The dialogue was so bad because it was like I want to say 65% jokes, and most of them were shitty jokes. And then kind of in line with the bad dialogue, I guess, but Bruce and Diana were so out of character. Clark, when we saw him, was so out of character. We barely saw any Lois. But yeah, like I was saying, the dialogue was fucking terrible. And it looks so awful. Such a downgrade from Snyder's visuals. Which, okay, obviously you don't want something so dark that you literally can't see what's happening. But Snyder's films literally aren't like that because he knows how to contrast colors. But I feel like the thing is that everyone has just gotten so used to the Marvel aesthetic with like all the bright colors that, in my opinion, are assaulting your eyes and really ugly. Yeah, I feel like people have just gotten so used to that aesthetic and just how bright everything is. And because Zach's films have a darker color palette, everyone just automatically says it's an issue. I've already talked about this more than I want to because since it's in the category of burn it, I really want to talk about it as little as possible. So let's name some scenes that make me want to claw my eyes out. And then we'll probably move on after that. The Lois and Martha scene where Martha calls her thirsty, despicable. The fact that that exists, I literally need someone to burn all copies of this film for that scene alone. We literally spent two films building how tender and caring and deeply Lois and Clark love each other, and then Joss Whedon and his misogynistic ass come into the room and he's like, time to slut shame Lois. And like as awful as that is, that's not anywhere near as awful as his treatment towards Ray Fisher and how he completely gutted Victor's storyline. But yeah, as I was kind of saying during my Wonder Woman tangent, Joss Whedon is a piece of shit and I hate him. Bruce and Diana was so forced and so weird, and I know for a fact that it's because Joss can't write women without being gross. My finding it weird is Whedon's doing because Snyder also leaned into the Bruce Diana dynamic in his version of Justice League that came out last year. And I loved them in that version. Like I was into it. But Bruce and Diana's dynamic in 2017 Justice League like makes me so uncomfortable. Arthur in the lasso scene. So honestly, this started out promising because I did really like how Arthur was like pointing out the team's issues and like their vulnerabilities. Because, like, as he says, Bruce has no powers. Victor and Barry are both fairly inexperienced, and Victor also has the added issue, I guess, that he's not fully in control of his cybernetic parts. But then he turns to Diana, and he's like just rambling about how attractive she is. And it was so uncomfortable. It was the worst. And like, it was clearly just there because Whedon wanted to talk about how hot he finds Gal. It was so gross. Okay, so Steppenwolf and the Parademons in 2017, because if you don't know, if you didn't like do a comparison, they look completely different from the 2021 Snyder version. Oh my God, they're such a joke in the Whedon version. They just don't look threatening at all. And then like we don't even really see them be threatening because so many of Steppenwolf's scenes are completely cut out of Whedon's version. And then the final fight is just embarrassing because like it's literally like it's written to be a situation of Clark can do everything, so why is anyone else there? And like the point of the league is they all have to work together. So like if you're saying Clark is like the uber superhero and everyone else is useless, like why does this film even exist? Also, there's like no emotional stakes because no one gets properly set up for any of the emotional arcs that are in the Snyder Cut. Okay, so next film is Aquaman. I'm gonna label this as perfection. And okay, so caveat, I label this perfection as like a superhero film, as a DC film, because I think it's really unique, especially for a superhero film, because of like the action adventure type vibe, which I really love about it. But there was a video essay I saw talking about why it sucks, which was speaking from an indigenous perspective, because the narrative can be like transplanted onto pretty much anyone who's mixed race because of the whole theme of like Arthur being half Atlantean and half human, and also the fact that Jason Momoa himself is mixed race. So there's like nothing really specifically said about indigenous people because of that fact, which like I'm sure was like purposeful on the studio's behalf. So I don't want to put like full responsibility onto James Wan for like it not being a film that talked about indigenous issues. But yeah, I'm gonna link that video because it was just really really excellent, and I think indigenous perspectives on this film are really really valuable. So if there's only one video essay you're gonna watch from the three that I'm planning to link, I hope it's this one. So yeah, I definitely think in that aspect, since the narrative could be about pretty much anyone mixed race, and it's not specific, I do think it's a failure in that area. But like I was saying, I think as a superhero film, it's above average, and it's really well done and really poignant. I think Orm was a pretty good villain. I think Yaya was amazing. Like definitely, him and Jason were definitely the best performances in the film, in my opinion. I loved seeing Arthur and Tom's relationship. I loved the start of the film showing us Tom and Atlanta's relationship. I loved seeing Arthur and Mira go from like hesitantly working together because like Mira needed him to take his rightful place so she could stop Orm. But yeah, I love that they like because like I don't want to say it was like a hate to love relationship because I feel like hate is too strong. Like obviously they were both getting annoyed with each other, but hate to love sounds too like aggressive. I don't think it was ever like mean spirited for either of them, but I just really love how we see them like because they're required to spend so much time together since they're going on this journey together. I love that we like see them starting to like trust each other and like be more vulnerable with each other and how that just translates to their romance as they keep being around each other. So yeah, I think their romance is one of the highlights of the film. The trench scene when they were on the way to get the trident was so cool. Like, I know I mentioned the Zod scene giving me chills. Oh my God, this scene, I I don't think I breathed at all. I don't, because it was so scary. Oh my gosh. Spoilers, I guess, so I'll give a timestamp again. I cried at the reveal that Atlanta was still alive. Like, I loved her and Arthur's reunion. I think that was one of the best scenes of the film. And I love that she like stops Orm and Arthur's fight, which honestly, I feel like this is gonna make people upset. Another controversial opinion. Honestly, their fight reminds me a lot of Bruce and Clark's fight. I mean, obviously, it's not like the exact same. Honestly, my thoughts aren't fully formed on like why my brain connects these two scenes, but just something about the power of mothers connects them in my head. And I just think that's kind of cool. So the next film that came out was Shazam. I actually can't rate this one because I haven't seen it. I know I'm gonna watch it at some point, probably this year because the sequel's coming out this year, I believe. And Lucy Liu's in the sequel, so I know I'm gonna see the sequel. But yeah, I'm a little bit wary of it because the premise just makes me uncomfortable because I know it's like Billy is a kid and he just suddenly gets these powers and goes to be a superhero. And like, I mean, I know there's a handful of stuff with like kid superheroes, but that whole concept just feels very like child soldiery, and it's just very weird that it's like a thing that's keeps popping up in media even still. So next film is Birds of Prey. This is probably gonna upset some people. I think this was meh. I think objectively it's like a decent film, but there was just so much hype for it. So I was like, I had high expectations and I just wasn't into it. Like, okay, so I said for Suicide Squad that I liked Harley and she was one of the highlights. And I think the writing for her between Suicide Squad and Birds of Prey was consistent. So it's not an issue of like her characterization being wildly different. But if I'm being completely honest, I found her so aggravating in this. Like I think it's a situation of there just being like too high of a dose of her because she is probably like 70% of this film. Like two-thirds through the film, I was just like praying for it to be over because I was so exhausted by Harley in this. Okay, so probably my biggest complaint with Birds of Prey is that I feel like it kind of fell into gender essentialism. Because, like, okay, so literally every dude was like creepy towards women or they were abusive and violent, like Roman. And then we have that older guy, the guy who lives near Harley and that she's like kind of friends with. And like he just seems very kind and loyal, but then he ends up selling her out to the bad guys. And I don't know, it just kind of felt like these qualities came off as if like the bad qualities are inherent to gender because literally just every guy was awful and untrustworthy. And like, I just don't think it's helpful discourse to be having. Another thing I found really frustrating was the queer coding of Roman and Zaz. So I'm not saying I have a problem with gay villains, as long as like their gayness isn't being written as like that's part of why they're evil. Like, go for it. I didn't like the queer coding between Roman and Zaz because it was supposed to be like humorous because both Harley is canonically bi and Renee is canonically a lesbian. But besides a brief little blink and you miss it moment when Harley's having like that cartoon intro, you'll miss the little tease of Poison Ivy of Pamela. So, I mean, if you miss that, there's nothing in the text to imply that Harley's bi. And then Renee, there's there's a little voiceover that mentions her ex-girlfriend, but if you somehow missed that voiceover, you'd have no idea that she likes women. So yeah, it just bothered me that you have two women who are canonically into women, but then like the most overtly gay dynamic was between the villains, and neither of them are explicitly said to be gay. And it just felt like that dynamic was more of a joke than like being handled with care and respect. I also want to mention, okay, so before I saw the film, I remember seeing like all of social media people talking about the scene where Harley broke into the police station. And like I thought that was cool because like yeah, we should have more conversations about how cops suck. So I was like excited about that scene from what I was seeing on social media about it. But then when I watched the film, she breaks in to kidnap that girl because the girl stole Roman's diamond and she wants to give Roman the diamond back. So she's literally kidnapping this girl to turn her over to Roman. Like this girl who's like probably 13. So like Harley is arguably in the wrong. Like she's about to give a child to a murderer to save her own ass. So it's not like she's doing anything out of justice. I also have to admit that I was disappointed by the lack of Helena because I don't know, the way the movie was advertised, I expected we'd see a lot more of the Birds of Prey working together, but like Helena doesn't even meet them until like what, the last 30 minutes? And then because Helena doesn't come into the picture with the rest of the group until so late, we don't even see the Birds of Prey like properly form until the last 5 minutes maybe. And that was just a letdown to me. And while I'm on the topic of the actual Birds of Prey dynamic, I just want to say that Dina is by far the best part of this film. I absolutely loved how she was like hesitant to get involved. And so like we see her struggling with that conflict because like obviously she doesn't like Roman and she doesn't like that she has to be so close to him, but she she just gets to a point where she can't stay on the sidelines anymore and she's like, no, I have to do what I can to stop him. So yeah, I just wanted to say that really quickly since I've been pretty much negative about this. So yeah, 'cause I'm about to say another negative thing. The main point as to why I didn't like this film is the sexual assault scene. So I will explain it and I'm going to compare it to the the scene of sexual assault in Man of Steel to illustrate why I dislike the Birds of Prey scene. So, okay, so Man of Steel, the sexual assault scene is there's this woman working at a bar. Clark also works there. And there's this guy who's drunk and he's harassing the woman because she obviously doesn't want to talk to him and he's trying to get her to stay and he like slaps her ass. And then in the Birds of Prey scene, we have Roman getting mad at a woman and he I don't remember if he or if he forces someone else. I think he forces like her boyfriend to tear off her dress. And then we have to watch for probably a minute the other women's reactions while we hear Roman laughing because he finds this whole thing hilarious. So I understand the point that was being made. I understand that a lot of times men are unlikely to step in those situations and stop other men from these acts of violence. But I feel like a Man of Steel, that sexual assault scene was 10 times more understanding and kinder. Because, like, Man of Steel, Clark sees that woman being harassed and he comes and steps in and he's like, hey, you can't do that. And while the woman tells him that she's okay, since he's getting belligerent, she's like, just leave it alone. And Clark literally walks out and quits that job because he's like, I can't stand by and not do anything. And if that's the position I'm gonna be in, if this happens again, then I can't stay here. Again, I get that a lot of times people are not going to be like Clark. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's anywhere near as impactful as the Man of Steel one because it's it just feels very gratuitous and it just wasn't necessary to be that graphic. And like you can say, oh, it's not that graphic because we're focusing on reaction shots from other characters, but like we honestly didn't even need that because like it literally could have just been like a scene where Roman tells that guy to tear the woman's dress off, and then like we just see Dina being upset. Like we cut to her walking out of the club and we see her like crying about it or something. Like that would have made the same point. I don't know. The way it was executed in the film just feels extremely gratuitous to me and cruel. And again, I think the Man of Steel scene is significantly more impactful. It feels kinder because like there's hope. Like Clark steps in and stops it, and we we just get none of that in the Birds of Prey scene because I mean I get it that everyone's terrified of Roman, and no one wants to get in between that because Roman might kill them if they do. But like that's how the writers wrote it because Roman's a fictional character. And yeah, I really do not feel like it needed to happen the way it did. I really don't like that scene. I think I was kind of mentally checked out for the rest of the film after that because it was deeply upsetting. So, next film is Wonder Woman 1984, which goes into Burn It. I haven't seen this film, but I've listened to multiple extensive reviews, so I know a ton of what happens. I think this falls into the gender essentialism with Birds of Prey, because literally every dude except for Steve is like a creep and tries to like assault women. But the reason why I refuse to watch this is because the fact that Steve comes back by inhabiting another man's body and he and Diana have sex, which that's rape. Steve inhabits a dude's body, so said dude is unconscious. He's not aware of what's happening. And yet Steve and Diana decide, since I guess since they didn't get the chance when Steve was alive in his own body, they decide to be intimate now when he's in someone else's body. Like it's rape. But yeah, I'm never gonna be watching that because yeah, gross. No, thank you. Next film is Zack Snyder's Justice League. This is perfection. Okay, so I say perfection, but of the things I've labeled in perfection, this is probably the one with the most caveats because as this is the end of the Superman trilogy, I definitely wanted more Clark than what we got. But yeah, given the events of Batman v Superman, obviously there's going to be a limited amount of Clark. But in Zack Snyder's version, I'm pretty sure we don't even see Clark until we're 2/3 through the film. So yeah, as a fan of this iteration of Clark, that was really sad. I'm conflicted on Lois in this film because I love her arc of like seeing her grieving process basically, but since this is likely the last time we're going to see this iteration of Lois, I don't like that that was the end of her story because like Man of Steel and Batman v Superman did such a good job at establishing her and like just how dedicated she is to finding the truth and ensuring justice because like that's her drive. So to see her not doing that, I don't want to say it feels wrong because again, I did really love her arc in this film, but like it's definitely not how I wanted things to end for her because I wanted to see more of the Lois that we saw in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. Also, minor spoilers. I don't know how I feel about the pregnancy. I'd always been of the mind that like at least this iteration of Lois and Clark, I didn't want them to have kids. So I don't know. I mean, I think they'd be good parents, but I don't know. I don't think kids are a necessary development for every fictional couple. So yeah, I didn't really want that for them. This part's gonna have spoilers, so I'll give a timestamp. Another big critique I have is I didn't want Silas to die. I get it in like the narrative sense because it like makes sense narratively because of the strife with Victor and Silas's relationship and just like the tragedy of it because Victor had been pushing him away and now when he's finally ready to accept him, Silas is gone. But I don't know, it really sucks that Victor had to lose both of his parents. And I wish he didn't. Narratively, I do understand that decision and I do think it was well executed. But like I don't think it had to go that way. Like I think they could have reconciled. And even though he like by the end of the film he's like accepting himself as he is now because that was his arc of like thinking he was a monster because of his cybernetic parts and learning to accept himself and be comfortable with who he is now. I don't know. I think reconciliation was possible because while he has this newfound family with the team, like he no longer has any bio family. Like he's all that's left of the Stone family. So yeah, on to the positives. So I think the film did a really great job at like a step. Technically, since Aquaman came out before this, not technically because it did, but since Aquaman came out before this version of Justice League, we didn't truly need like Arthur to be established because Aquaman did that. But since this was originally supposed to come out before Aquaman, I think it did a good job at setting up Arthur, Victor, and Barry. And I think it did a really good job setting up like emotional arcs because like we have Arthur who's kind of rejecting his Atlantean heritage and just having a lot of bitterness kind of towards that part of himself. We have Victor, which I already kind of talked about, where he's like struggling to accept his new life and like be comfortable with the fact that he's got these cybernetic parts. We have Barry, who, like that whole emotional story with his father and trying to like find his place because he's kind of lonely since it's basically just him on his own. On top of establishing those three, I think the film did a good job balancing all these new characters and also Bruce and Diana and Clark and Lois because that's a lot of characters for one film. I mean, it's a 4-hour film, so we have it's longer than the average, but like that's still so much ground to cover in 4 hours. Zach has a way of making these like I always feel bad describing his films as dense, but like I struggle so hard to come up with a word that like is better at saying what I mean, because like he he puts so much information into his films, like so much comic lore, but like it he does it in a way that it doesn't feel overwhelming and it doesn't feel like a shit ton of exposition. And like there's just so much talent in being able to do that. And it's really cool to like just see how much of a DC nerd he is because like it's so obvious how much he loves these characters. The final fight, oh my gosh, it was so powerful. Like the emotional stakes were so high because we actually got team bonding in this film, unlike the 2017 version. And like just very reversing time, I sobbed. Victor splitting the mother boxes and like having that vision of himself, I sobbed. Like, oh my gosh, it was so good. And I love how everyone had a part in the final fight, unlike 2017 version. And I love how it was like everyone was doing things related to their skill set. Steppenwolf was so scary in this version. Oh my god. The fight between the Amazonians and Steppenwolf. Genuinely one of the most incredible fight scenes I've ever seen in my life. Also, I love Warrior Wonder Woman, which is like so refreshing after the bullshit of Patty Jenkins Wonder Woman. Like, oh my gosh. It was so satisfying to see Diana just take out all of those guys at the bank like so easily. And then that scene where she stopped all the bullets was incredible. And then the way she just like decimated that last guy who was still determined to blow up the bank. Oh my gosh, it was just so good. Also, okay, my last point, because I'm just gushing at this point. Last thing I want to say, Zach just gets romance. Like Clark and Lois is still top tier. Bruce and Diana was so good. That little tease of Barry and Iris, so good. That little tease of Arthur and Mira, so good. Like I was buzzing after watching this because all of it was excellent. So the last film in this template, because the Batman's not on here, is the Suicide Squad. So I haven't seen this one. I'm sure I will cave and watch it at some point because I really like Idris Elba, and as I was saying with Suicide Squad, I love Viola Davis. And since it's a team film, Harley might be tolerable to me again. But James Gunn is the director of the Suicide Squad, and I've seen probably 4 or 5 of his films, and everything I've seen of his has either had a rape scene or a sexual assault joke. And the fact that that's repeated in his work makes me very worried and very uncomfortable. And then I also know about those tweets that were like pedo shit. So yeah, I don't like James Gunn. I don't trust that man. I think he is very creepy. Okay, so final, we have the Batman, which is a fun time. So I don't want to like rehash everything I said in my review, but quick summary, I guess. I am obsessed with Bruce and Selina's dynamic. Absolutely the highlight of the film. I really liked how much this film showcased Bruce's detective skills, but I also think that was a hindrance because we saw so little of Bruce outside of the role of Batman. Like I said in my review, I think outside of Bruce, Selina, and the Riddler, a lot of the other characters were pretty bland. I'll put up a post in a second that because there was an important point and I want to talk about this post. The post said that the way Paul Dano was playing Riddler felt ableist, which I didn't read it that way upon watching it, but upon hearing this person looking back, I do see where they're coming from. So that definitely makes the scene where Bruce is meeting the Riddler, I guess, for lack of a better word, more troubling. But I did like that the Riddler was like planning everything out and just like had all this information and was always ahead of our hero. Because those are the villains that I like best. The ones who there's like the game of trying to catch them. The way that information about Bruce's mom being mentally ill was just kind of dropped out of nowhere, and that it felt really sensationalistic. I didn't like that because, yeah, the way this film handled mental illness was pretty bad. But yeah, I had realized that the film was kind of leaning in towards these politics, but I hadn't thought about it as much as this individual who made this post. So, like this person says, like Riddler wanting to expose corruption is admirable, but this film falls into it, and it's not just a Marvel issue, because this happens in tons of media, but it falls into the trap of making it so extreme that like you can't side with them because yes, wanting to expose corruption is admirable, but you're doing it at the cost of like just killing people as you see fit, which is not good. And like this person even says, trying to like make some kind of connection to like right wing violence when his ideology very much isn't right wing is like fucked up. And yeah, like okay, so this post also points out that it's like in favor of like police, but like I feel like you kind of had to expect that going in because since this film is leaning so heavily into Bruce as a detective and like we knew Jim was one of the main characters, like I feel like you kind of had to expect going in that it was going to be like pro cop. So that didn't surprise me. I did kind of like question the fact that they had a black woman as like the mayoral candidate and having her like be talking about how important these structures are because like that's another thing. So like this film also falls into the trap of like it's like hey, look at all these corrupt cops and then like instead of there being a solution of like dissolving the police and like coming up with a new system, it's like, oh, we just have to replace all the corrupt cops, which like that's not making as big a change as you think. This could just happen again, especially since you didn't change the system, you just changed the people inside of it. So now we'll go on to probably the final thing I have to say about this film, which is a rant of sorts. So, as I said, I did like the Batman, but my favorite version of Bruce is Batman v Superman Bruce. And um, I find it very frustrating how I've seen so many people talk about how much they loved the Batman, but then a lot of these same people are like people who shitted on BVS, or it's someone saying like Bruce in the Batman is like the only good interpretation of Bruce, and like they're so similar. Batman v Superman Bruce and Bruce from the Batman are both like broken down and like exhausted, but they're consumed by this feeling of duty to continue this work. And in both films, there has to be like the spark that makes them decide to change and that they want to be better and like inspire people. In Batman v Superman, that spark is realizing Clark's humanity and deciding he needs to honor Clark and be more like Clark. In the Batman, that's his conversation with the Riddler and realizing he's inspiring the wrong people because he's obsessed with being a symbol of fear. And so after that talk, he realizes I don't have to be this way. I can be a positive because prior to when we've seen him, he hasn't really been a figure to help people in need. He's been a figure to punish those who've been doing criminal acts. And there's a big difference between focusing on those in need and punishing those who are doing quote unquote wrong. And so he makes the decision to change. It's the same arc. And also, I remember people being mad about Batman v Superman Bruce in saying that he was like too violent. I just remember so much vitriol for that version of Bruce, and it's like this Bruce literally has all the same problems as Batman v Superman Bruce, and he's even more brutal. Cause like I was in shock during the fight scenes in the Batman. Like this version of Bruce literally had no mercy, and this is just 2 years of him doing this. Like he's already so hardened, and he just sees himself as like the blunt force tool. And it's just, it feels like people will see Zach's name attached to something and just automatically hate it because, as I kind of was saying, there's just so much visually or narratively that like Zach does, and then someone else will do it and it will get praised when Zach just got shitted on for it. And it's exhausting. That's a downer to end this on, but yeah, so to reiterate, my ratings were for perfection, we have Batman v Superman, Aquaman, and Justice League 2021, Zack Snyder's Justice League. For a fun time, we have Man of Steel, Suicide Squad, and The Batman. For meh, we have Birds of Prey. For awful, we have Wonder Woman. And for burnout, we have Justice League 2017 and Wonder Woman 1984. Yeah, thank you greatly if you listen to this whole thing. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on these films. So if you really disagree with me on something, or if you just want to be like, oh, hey, that's an interesting perspective, like I'd love to hear your thoughts. If I disliked one of your faves and was saying bad things about it, again, I'm not saying anything bad about you as a person. I mean, I know I did kind of talk about fandom a little bit when I got defensive about Zach and his work, but I did very much try to stay away from that and solely look at the texts as they were presented and what I saw as issues and what I saw as positives.
Also, I want to apologize for the inconsistency in audio quality. I've been using my phone, which is 6 years old, and it's kind of on its last legs. So I'm in the process of getting a new one. So hopefully I'll see you guys soon. Thanks and goodbye.